I was standing on my own front porch, well, what I thought was still partly my front porch, when my phone buzzed with the message that would end whatever was left of my relationship with my father. The late afternoon sun was hitting the shutters just the way it always had when Mom was alive, warm and gold and gentle, and for one strange moment I felt like I'd stepped into a memory instead of the present. I had my old key in my hand. I had a duffel bag slung across my shoulder. I had a small smile because I thought I was coming home to something familiar. And then I read it. "We changed every lock and the gate code. We no longer trust you." Just like that. No greeting, no explanation, no welcome home. I stared at the screen, letting the words settle, letting them press against me like cold hands. After a few seconds, I typed back the only thing my Marine Corps training and my pride would allow. Noted, a bold move. Then I slid the phone into my pocket, stood there for another moment, and quietly accepted that whatever I had been hoping for wasn't going to happen. That was the hook. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. But the story didn't start there. It started years before, long before locks were changed and trust was revoked. I had just finished a short rotation on base in North Carolina, nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, just routine Marine duty, readiness checks, logistics coordination. A handful of pre-dawn training cycles that left my hair smelling like sand and humidity for days. I'd been gone maybe 9 weeks, not long enough for anyone to forget who I was or what my voice sounded like. My plan was simple: land drive, the 4 hours back to the old town, drop in on Dad, surprise him with dinner from the diner Mom used to love, and maybe have one normal quiet evening with my family. For people over 60, family dinners still matter. For me, they're complicated, but I keep trying. Maybe that's a flaw, or maybe that's what love is: messy, uneven, stubborn. The day I drove home, the sky was that soft American blue that feels like home no matter what state you're in. I passed rows of old tobacco fields, a billboard for a church revival, and a gas station that still had a mechanical Coca-Cola sign that creaked in the wind. Everything looked exactly as it had since my childhood, like the town was frozen in amber, untouched by time or change. So when I reached the turn that led into our neighborhood, the one full of aging maple trees and houses built in the 1970s, I let myself believe nothing had changed there either. I slowed the car, rolled down the window, and breathed in the late summer air. I wanted to believe something good was waiting. But the first warning came from the gate. I punched in the code I had used for years. Denied. Tried again. Denied. A third time, slower, more careful. Denied. The keypad beeped sharply at me like I'd offended it. At first I assumed Dad had simply updated the code and forgotten to tell me. He'd done that before. But deep down I felt something colder. Something deliberate. I pulled over, walked to the gate to try manually lifting it. It's old, rusted, and stubborn, but the hinges wouldn't budge. That's when I checked my phone, and that's when the message came in. I didn't respond with anger. Marines don't lash out, we absorb, we evaluate, we act. But I felt the wound. I felt it deep. I drove the rest of the way around the block, parked outside the house, and walked toward the porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked twice in the distance. A wind chime tinkled from the Thompsons' yard. My boots hit the walkway with steady, measured steps, only to stop when I saw something that hadn't been there before. A new deadbolt, a new smart lock, a new security camera above the door. Changes don't happen in 9 weeks unless someone wants them to. I lifted my hand to knock to do something, but then I heard laughter inside. Not my father's, not my brother's. A woman's laughter, sharp, self-satisfied, the kind that always seemed to hover behind me like a mosquito when Dad remarried. My stepmother. I knew right then I wasn't supposed to knock. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. Still, I tried my old key mostly for dignity. It didn't even slide in. I backed away from the house, walked down the porch steps, and stood at the end of the driveway. I folded my arms, stared at the windows I used to clean every Saturday growing up, and waited to see if anyone would come out. No one did. No, "Hey, you're home. No, we missed you." Just the closed curtains and the sound of my stepmother's laugh. I turned to leave quietly, not dramatically, because walking away was the only thing left to do. But here's the part my father didn't know. The part my stepmother definitely didn't know. The part they both forgot when they sent that message. The house wasn't his, not legally, not anymore. He had changed the locks on a property he didn't own. He had barred entry to the person who did, and he had no idea what he had just triggered. But someone else did, someone who knew the paperwork. And when he arrived, trembling, breathless, everything would change. If you grow up in the same house your whole life, the walls stop feeling like wood and drywall. They become witnesses. That little brick split level on Maple Lane had watched me take my first steps, slam my bedroom door at 13, lace up my boots for the Marine Corps at 18. To me, it wasn't a property. It was almost another family member. What my father never quite accepted was that the house didn't start with him, and it wasn't supposed to end with him either. It belonged to my mother's side of the family first. My grandparents bought it back when interest rates were high, gas was cheap, and you could still know the man who signed your mortgage. My grandfather was a carpenter, the kind of man who could fix anything with a coffee can full of screws and a worn-down screwdriver. My grandmother worked at the library 3 days a week and ran the family the other 4. They poured themselves into that house, patching, painting, adding a little here when they had the money. It was never fancy, but it was honest. The kind of place where the coffee pot was always on and the screen door never completely latched. When my mom grew up and brought my dad home to meet them, they handed him a key and a seat at the table without hesitation. That was their way. For a long time, Dad honored that. He mowed the lawn, cleaned the gutters, and fixed the squeaky step on the back deck every spring. He and my grandfather rebuilt the shed together one summer, arguing over measurements, but laughing anyway. From the outside, we looked like any other regular American family trying to make a life. Then Mom got sick. It started with something they want to check again on a scan, and ended with us memorizing the route to the oncology wing. The house watched all of it, the late-night returns from the hospital, the whispered arguments in the kitchen, the quiet mornings when Mom would wrap herself in a sweater and sit on the back deck just looking at the yard. I didn't know it then, but while we were fighting for Mom, my grandparents were also planning for what might come after. They loved my father, but they weren't blind. They'd seen his temper. They'd seen how he handled stress by gripping tighter to whatever he could control. So they went to see a lawyer. They set up a trust. On paper, it was simple. The house would stay in the family, but it would skip 1 generation. When I turned 30, full ownership would pass to me. Until then, my father could live there as long as he maintained the property and paid the usual expenses. He would be protected. I would be protected. Most importantly, my mother's home would be protected. They didn't tell me. They didn't want to weigh down a teenager who was already watching her mother fade. They barely told my father more than the lawyer has things arranged so everything will be taken care of. Grief makes people vague. Mom died before she ever saw me in uniform. The morning of her funeral, I stood in my bedroom, the same pale blue room where she used to tuck me in, and I promised her out loud that I'd take care of Dad. It felt like the right thing to say. It still does some days. After she was gone, something in my father stiffened. He didn't cry where anyone could see. He worked more. He watched more television. He started talking about the house as if it were the only part of his life that still listened to him. My house, my rules. He'd say, sometimes joking, sometimes not. When he remarried a few years later, the vocabulary shifted again. Our house, our plans, our equity. My stepmother had strong opinions about paint colors and furniture and what should be updated. Little by little, pieces of my mother vanished. The yellow kitchen became gray. The floral curtains my grandmother sewed were replaced with something more modern. Her teapot disappeared from the stove one day and never came back. By then I was in and out, mostly out. Boot camp training, first duty station. When I did come home, I slept in the guest room and tried to be grateful there was still a place to sleep. I noticed the changes, but I kept my mouth shut. You learn quickly in the Marines which hills are worth dying on. Arguing about throw pillows and wallpaper didn't feel like one of them. The truth about the house came to me in a plain white envelope. I was 29, sitting on my bunk on base on a rare quiet afternoon when I opened a letter from a law office back in my hometown. Inside was a short note from the family lawyer who had handled my grandparents' affairs, asking me to call when I had a moment. I figured it was about some forgotten savings bond or final paperwork. I dialed out of courtesy more than curiosity. He greeted me by my full name the way people do who've known you since you were missing your front teeth. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Your grandparents were very proud of you. They wanted to be sure you'd always have somewhere to come home to. Do you remember the house paperwork we did when your mother was ill? I didn't, not really. I remembered tired faces and closed doors, not documents. So he walked me through it, slowly, patiently, like he knew I was carrying more than one kind of weight. They placed the house in a trust, he explained. The terms state that when you turn 30, ownership transfers to you. Your father can continue to live there with your consent, but the property itself, title, rights, and responsibilities will belong to you. I sat there, phone to my ear, staring at the cinderblock wall of my room while his words sank in. A part of me wanted to argue, to say, no, that's Dad's house. Another part of me felt my mother's hand on my shoulder the way she used to when I'd get stubborn about something. This wasn't about pride, it was about protection. I don't want to throw him out, I said finally. And nothing in the trust requires you to, the lawyer replied gently. The point is that you have a legal home no matter what happens. That was your mother's wish. We talked a little longer about dates and signatures and what would happen automatically when I turned 30. He told me there was nothing I needed to do immediately. Just be aware, he said. And if anything changes with your father or the house, call me before you react. Sometimes knowing where you stand makes all the difference. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time listening to the hum of the air vent and the distant sound of someone laughing down the hall. I thought about my father, about my stepmother, about the way they said our house with such certainty. I thought about my mother on the back deck at sunrise memorizing the yard. I decided not to say anything yet. I didn't want our next conversation to be about legal documents and lines on a deed. I wanted stubbornly to believe we could find some normal ground again without a stack of papers between us. But trusts don't care about intentions, they care about time. By the time I pulled into that driveway with my duffel bag, my orders finished, and my heart quietly hoping for a warm welcome, the calendar had already done its work. I was past 30. The paperwork was in place. On file at the county courthouse, in the lawyer's office, in the systems that don't forget. On the day my father sent that message and changed those locks, he thought he was defending what was his. He had no idea he'd just locked out the legal owner. If there's one thing I've learned about small towns, it's that news doesn't travel. It spreads like butter melting across warm bread. Slowly at first, then all at once. And when my father changed the locks on the house, the story that reached the town wasn't the truth. It was whatever version my father and stepmother sculpted to make themselves look like victims, and me look like a problem. I didn't hear it from them. I heard it from Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor, who tracked me down in the grocery store parking lot 3 days later. I had stopped to grab milk and bread, simple grounding things, the kind of groceries people over 60 have in their baskets because they cook real meals instead of eating out of takeout containers. I was trying to keep my mind busy, my emotions level, when I heard someone call my name. "Sweetheart, is that you?" I turned, and there she was, white hair curled in soft loops, wearing the same quilted vest she'd worn since before I left for boot camp. She looked at me the way people look at someone returning from a long winter. "I've been worried sick," she said, before I could even say hello. "Your father said, well, he said things I just couldn't believe." My stomach tightened. "What things?" She lowered her voice the way older women do when they're about to deliver news they don't want to be delivering. "He said you'd become disrespectful, cold, that you stormed out last time you were home, that you didn't want anything to do with the family anymore." She frowned. "He said he had no choice but to change the locks to protect his home." I laughed quietly without humor. "Stormed out, Mrs. Henderson, I haven't even been home in 9 weeks. She put a hand on my arm. I knew something didn't sound right. "You've never been disrespectful a day in your life. Marines don't storm out of anywhere." She paused. "But people are talking." Of course they were. This was a town where people read church bulletins the way others read crime novels. As I drove back to my rental place, more pieces fell into place. Texts from old high school acquaintances, asking vague questions, an email from a family friend offering prayers during this difficult time, and even a voicemail from the pastor at the church I grew up in. My father hadn't just changed the locks, he'd changed the narrative. And then came the message from my brother. My brother, 3 years younger, forever the golden son. I don't mean that in bitterness, it's simply a fact. He was the one who stayed close to home, the one Dad bragged about at cookouts, the one who understood responsibility according to my stepmother. He wasn't a bad man, but he had inherited Dad's ability to rewrite history to suit whatever mood he was in. His text came in around sunset. "Heard you're causing trouble again. Dad's just trying to protect what's his. Maybe if you visited more things wouldn't be like this." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. "What's his causing trouble? Visited more." I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted it too. Finally, I put the phone face down and let the silence say what I couldn't. People over 60 know this kind of family dynamic all too well. Every generation has someone who gets cast as the good one, and someone who gets cast as the difficult one, and it has very little to do with truth. It has more to do with who makes the fewest emotional demands. My father liked my brother because he didn't challenge him. I challenged him simply by existing in a way he couldn't control. The story spread further. My stepmother posted something vague online, one of those posts older women make when they want attention without responsibility. "Hard times reveal true colors. Grateful for those who stand by us." There were heart emojis, praying hands, a few comments from church ladies saying they were lifting the family up in prayer. Not one person asked my side. For a moment I felt that old familiar ache, the one left behind when Mom died. She used to be the person who set the record straight. She used to be the voice of reason, the one who told Dad when he was being too harsh, the one who would have opened that door for me long before I pulled out my key. Without her, the house had become unbalanced, and without her voice, mine didn't seem to count. Still, I tried. I called Dad. The phone rang 4 times, then sent me to voicemail. I tried again the next morning. Same result. By the 3rd day the mailbox was full, he'd blocked me. My stepmother didn't answer either. My brother responded only with another message: "Dad's not interested in drama. Let it go." Let it go, if only it were that simple. But what none of them knew, what none of them bothered to know, was that I wasn't fighting for access to a building. I was fighting for the truth about my mother's legacy, the legacy her parents fought to protect when they created that trust. I was fighting for a promise I made when I was young and grieving and didn't understand anything except that I loved my parents more than my own breath. Still, I didn't react. I didn't show up banging on the door or posting anything online. Marines don't escalate without necessity. We evaluate. We wait. The turning point came from someone I didn't expect, the family lawyer. He left me a voicemail that was short, urgent, and completely unlike his usual calm tone. "Please call me back as soon as possible. It's regarding the lock changes. Your father may have made a serious mistake." Those words, serious mistake, echoed in my mind like a warning bell. Something had shifted. Something bigger than rumors, bigger than pride, bigger than the stupid narrative my father and stepmother had spun. The lawyer wouldn't have used that tone unless something legally binding had been breached, and I already knew what it had to be. Dad didn't know the house belonged to me. He didn't know the trust had matured. He didn't know he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But he was about to. Because the lawyer wasn't just concerned, he was frightened. And when a lawyer trembles, someone has done something very, very wrong. I didn't call the lawyer back right away. Not because I didn't think it mattered, but because I knew once I did, things would shift from emotional to legal, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. There is a moment before any confrontation where you take a breath and realize your life is about to split clean down the middle, before and after. I sat at the small kitchen table of the rental house I'd taken near base, listening to the old refrigerator hum. Outside, cicadas buzzed the way they always do in late summer, loud enough to feel like they were inside the house with me. I sipped cold coffee and looked at the lawyer's number glowing on my screen. Finally, I pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Thank God," he said. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 days." "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Your father." A sigh, papers shuffling. "He may have created a legal violation concerning the trust. I need to meet with both of you immediately." Immediately, my stomach tightened. "He won't answer my calls." "I know," the lawyer replied. "He's been avoiding mine too." That told me everything. We scheduled a meeting at his modest office in town, the same place where he had handled my grandparents' wills, the place with the faded navy carpet and the framed photos of community events from the 1980s. I knew the room. My childhood lived in that room, but this time it would host a very different kind of conversation. Before the meeting, I tried once more to reach my father, not with anger, not with demands, but with a simple message. "Dad, we need to talk. Please meet with me." He didn't respond, but 2 hours later my stepmother did. Her message popped up on my phone, dripping with sugar and vinegar the way she always spoke when she felt cornered. "We don't owe you a meeting. Your father is exhausted by your behavior. The house is ours. You have no right to interfere." The capitalization did not go unnoticed. I took a breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and replied, "We'll see what the lawyer says." She didn't answer, but the silence felt like arrogance rather than agreement. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. Old habit. Marines avoid being late the way some people avoid poison ivy. I parked beneath the familiar oak tree outside the law office and sat in the car for a moment, watching the doorway. It felt strange being back here. The last time I walked into that building, my grandmother had hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. She smelled like lavender and dryer sheets. That memory hit me hard right there in the car, and for a moment I wished she were still alive. She would have known what to say. She always knew what to say. At exactly 10:02 a.m., my father's SUV pulled into the lot. He got out first, jaw-set shoulders squared as if he were preparing to walk into a courtroom as a defendant rather than a father meeting with his daughter. My stepmother followed behind him, her sunglasses so large they hid half her face. They didn't look at me, not once. Still, I nodded politely as we walked toward the entrance at the same time. "Morning," I said. My stepmother's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a grimace. My father didn't speak at all. Inside, the receptionist, who had been there since I was in kindergarten, looked at me with eyes full of worry. "He'll see you right away," she said softly. We stepped into the conference room. I sat on one side of the table. My father and stepmother sat on the other. There was a gulf between us that felt wider than the Grand Canyon. A few minutes later, the lawyer stepped in. He looked rattled. His tie was crooked and he held his folder the way someone holds a fragile object they're afraid to drop. He didn't bother with small talk. He didn't even sit down at first. Instead, he placed the folder on the table, pressed his hands against it, and said in a voice that trembled slightly, "Sir, what have you done?" My father blinked. "Excuse me." The lawyer exhaled deeply, pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the table. "This is the trust document your late in-laws created. It states clearly that upon their granddaughter's 30th birthday, full ownership of the house transfers to her. This includes title rights, property authority, and legal responsibility." My stepmother let out a sharp laugh. "That's ridiculous. My husband has lived in that house for 30 years. It's his." The lawyer shook his head. "No, it's not." Then turning to my father again, "And sir, by changing the locks, you've effectively barred the legal owner from her own property." My father's face went pale. Not white pale, like the color drained out of him all at once. "That can't be right," he whispered. "It is right," the lawyer said firmly. "You've put yourself at risk of civil penalties, and depending on how far this goes, potentially criminal charges. Locking a property's lawful owner out of her own home is a serious matter." My stepmother snapped, "She hasn't lived there in years. She has no claim." "I have the claim," I said quietly. "Mom's parents made sure of it." The lawyer nodded. "Her grandparents wanted to protect her. The trust is ironclad." My father put a hand to his forehead. "But the house I paid, the taxes, the repairs, everything?" "You paid to use the house," the lawyer said gently. "You didn't own it, and you no longer have the authority to deny access." Silence flooded the room. My stepmother's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the right angle. My father stared at the table as though it were suddenly speaking a different language. Then he looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice small in a way I'd never heard before. Because I said softly I didn't want our relationship to be about paperwork. I wanted it to be about trust. The irony of that word hung in the air. "The locks, the message, the accusation? We no longer trust you." A sentence that now circled back on the person who sent it. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We need to talk through next steps. But first, I suggest you all take a moment." He stepped out of the room, leaving the three of us alone with the truth and the weight of what came next. The moment the lawyer closed the door behind him, the room became unbearably quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows an argument, it was heavier than that, like the air itself had become thick enough to choke on. My father sat rigid in his chair, staring at nothing. My stepmother kept adjusting her bracelet over and over, the metal clinking softly, nervously, betraying the calm face she was trying to maintain. I didn't speak, not yet. I wanted him to be the one to break the silence. Finally he did. "I don't understand," he said, his voice brittle. "How can it be hers? I've lived there. Your whole life. Your mother and I." "My mother knew what she was doing," I interrupted gently. "She knew you. She knew me. She knew things weren't always going to be smooth." His eyes snapped to mine, wounded. "So she didn't trust me." I swallowed. A part of me wanted to reassure him, soften the blow, but the truth deserved oxygen. "She wanted to make sure I always had a home," I said quietly. "She wasn't replacing you. She was protecting me." My stepmother scoffed. "Protecting you? From what your father has done nothing but love you. And this," she gestured wildly at the folder on the table, "this is manipulation from beyond the grave. It's absurd." I looked at her for a long moment before responding. "This isn't about you." She stiffened. "Everything is about me when I live in that house. Our house." "It's not your house," I said simply. That sentence landed like a hammer. She flinched. My father flinched. And I felt my stomach twist, not from satisfaction but from sadness. Nothing about this felt victorious. It felt like watching a bridge you'd walked across your whole life finally collapse. The lawyer re-entered, then carrying another folder. He set it gently on the table and sat down, folding his hands. "I'm going to explain this clearly," he said, in that firm, patient tone lawyers use when they're trying to save a family from tearing itself apart. He slid the second folder toward my father. "This is the full trust document. Your in-laws drafted it with the intention of safeguarding the property for their granddaughter. They were very intentional about it, and they made sure everything was legally airtight." My father flipped through the pages, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't remember signing anything." "You didn't," the lawyer said. "Your consent wasn't required. They were the owners. They had the legal right to determine the future of the property." My stepmother leaned forward. "But surely you can challenge this. There must be some loophole, some clause. My husband deserves." The lawyer held up a hand. "You can't challenge a trust that has already been executed properly and without fraud. Everything was filed, witnessed, certified. Your husband has no claim to ownership at all, not past or present." And as of her 30th birthday, he gestured toward me, she became the sole legal owner. My father closed the folder and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. "I never knew," he whispered. "All these years," I thought. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He thought the house was his anchor, the last piece of my mother he could hold on to. He thought he'd earned it through years of mowing lawns and fixing roofs and paying bills. He thought the universe owed him something for suffering the loss of his wife. "I wasn't trying to take anything away from you," I said softly. "I never intended to push you out. You've lived there your whole life. But you shut me out without even talking to me first." His eyes shone, not with tears my father rarely cried, but with something raw and unsettled. "I didn't think you cared about the house," he said. "You were always gone. The Corps deployments training. I thought you didn't want anything to do with it." My throat tightened. "I wanted memories," I said. "Not possession, just memories. A place where I still felt connected to Mom." My stepmother sighed loudly, crossing her arms. "So now what? You throw us out, is that what this is? Revenge." The lawyer answered before I could. "No one said anything about eviction. Right now the only issue is that the legal owner was locked out, and that must be corrected immediately." My stepmother turned a deep shade of red. "Corrected. We changed the locks for safety. She could have come barging in. She had every right to enter," the lawyer cut in. "You did not have the right to bar her entry. In fact, doing so puts you in violation of property law." My father's jaw clenched. "So what happens if we don't change the locks back?" The lawyer sighed. "Then your daughter could pursue legal action, and you would lose." My father seemed to shrink in his chair. I'd never seen him look so small. Something shifted inside me, not anger, not pride, something closer to grief. "Dad," I said gently, "I'm not here to fight you. I just want honesty. I want respect. I want us to talk like family." He stared at me with the expression of a man who suddenly realized he had built a wall and trapped himself inside it. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. I took a breath. "First, unlock the doors. Make a new key for me. Let's reset the gate code. Then, we talk about rules, responsibilities, and boundaries. Together." My stepmother opened her mouth to argue, but my father held up a hand. "No," he said, "she's right." It was the first time he'd taken my side over hers. The room seemed to tilt. The lawyer nodded approvingly. "This is the right first step. You can rebuild from here, but only if everyone accepts the truth." My father leaned back in his chair. His shoulders slumped like all the weight he'd been carrying finally had somewhere else to go. "I'm sorry," he said, not loudly, not dramatically, but sincerely. It was the sentence I had waited years to hear. And it was only the beginning. When you're a kid, you think the hard talks will get easier when you're grown. You tell yourself, "When I'm older, I'll know what to say." But standing in that parking lot outside the lawyer's office with my father and stepmother, I realized something people over 60 already know by heart. Some conversations never get easy. You just finally run out of ways to avoid them. Dad walked ahead of us, his shoulders a little bent, like the air had gotten heavier. My stepmother followed behind, lips-tight sunglasses on every step, radiating anger. I stayed in the middle, the same place I'd always been, between his pride and everyone else's expectations. Out by the cars, my father stopped and turned toward me. The sun was behind him, and for a second I saw him the way I remembered as a kid, bigger than life, strong, unshakable. This time he just looked tired. "Come by the house this afternoon," he said. His voice scraped a little. "We'll fix the locks." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. "I'll be there," I said. My stepmother let out a sharp breath. "This whole thing is ridiculous. We wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't dragged lawyers into it." I met her gaze. "They were involved a long time ago," I said calmly. "My grandparents made sure of that. Long before I ever had a say." She looked away. Dad didn't defend her. That by itself was new. I didn't drive straight there. Instead, I took the long way home, past the high school, the little park with the cracked slide, the diner where Mom used to bring home pie in white cardboard boxes. Life in town moved at the same slow, familiar pace, people mowing lawns, an old couple walking a dog, a kid wobbling on a bike without training wheels. Nothing had changed, except us. By the time I turned onto Maple Lane, a locksmith's van was parked by the curb. The gate that had refused to open for me last time now stood wide, as if the house itself were trying to apologize. The locksmith was at the front door, tools in hand. My father stood near him with his arms folded, watching. When he heard my car door, he turned. "You're here," he said. "You asked me to be," I answered. We stood side by side while the locksmith finished. A few minutes later, he handed my father 2 fresh keys, then turned and held one out to me. "This one's yours," he said, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. The metal felt cool and solid in my palm. I closed my hand around it and exhaled slowly. When the van pulled away, the quiet settled in. Just me, my father, and a house that had seen every version of us. "I shouldn't have sent that message," Dad said. I didn't jump in, I waited. "It was impulsive," he went on. "Your stepmother was upset. I was angry. It felt like you were choosing sides against us." "How could I choose sides," I asked softly, "when no one even told me what was going on?" He winced, looking down at the porch. "I've never been good at talking about things," he muttered. "That might be true," I said, "but it doesn't excuse locking your daughter out of the house her mother grew up in, and then telling everyone I'm the problem." He sank down onto the top step like his knees didn't quite trust him. I sat beside him, leaving just enough space between us for the years we'd wasted. "When you joined the Marines," he said slowly, "I told myself you were leaving us. Me. I know you said it wasn't like that, but it's what it felt like. Every time you left, I felt like I failed some test I didn't know I was taking." I stared out at the yard. The maple tree cast long, familiar shadows. "I didn't join to get away from you," I said. "I joined because Mom believed I could do something hard and meaningful. I wanted to make her proud. I wanted you to be proud, too." He swallowed. He said. "I am. I just didn't say it. It felt like if I admitted it, I was admitting I'd lost you to a world I don't understand. We sat with that for a moment, the Marine Corps on one side, this quiet little street on the other, and my father stuck somewhere between. Why didn't you tell me about the trust, he asked. Because I didn't want this house to become a battlefield between us, I answered. I didn't want you to think I was counting down the days until you were gone. I thought maybe someday when we were calmer we'd sit down and talk it through together. As a plan, not as a fight. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been stuck in his chest for 10 years. Has anything about us ever been calm? He asked, with the faintest hint of a smile. Not really, I admitted, but it could be less explosive. He snorted just a little. It was the first almost laugh I'd heard from him in a long time. Dad, I said I don't want to evict you. I'm not looking to take this house away from you. He turned his head. You're not... No, I said. Legally, yes, this house is mine. But I don't want you homeless, and I don't want to erase the life you've lived here. I just want the truth to be acknowledged. I want respect. I want an end to the stories about your ungrateful daughter trying to steal what's yours. He flinched at his own words reflected back at him. I said a lot of things I shouldn't have, he admitted quietly. To the neighbors, to the pastor, to your brother. I know, I said. It hurt. But you can fix some of that. You can tell them what really happened. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to them, he said. I'll set it straight. I owe you that much. From inside, a cabinet door slammed. My stepmother's footsteps crossed the hardwood. Her presence pressed on the edges of the moment, but for once she wasn't the center of it. What about her? I asked gently. He sighed. She's angry. She thinks this is all some scheme you and your grandparents cooked up. It isn't, I said. And she's allowed to be upset, but I can't shape my life around what your wife is or isn't willing to accept. I won't fight her, but I won't disappear either. He nodded again, slower this time. You sound like your mother, he said. I take that as a compliment, I replied. We went inside together. The house smelled different, but underneath the new candles and cleaning sprays, I could still find traces of old lemon oil and Sunday pot roast. The dining table my grandfather built still sat in the same spot. The little scuff mark near the baseboard from my brother's toy truck was still there. Some things change, some things don't. We sat at the table, just the two of us. The last time we'd sat there together without anyone else was probably the week after Mom died. Here's what I'd like to do, I said. We put it in writing that this house is legally mine. We also put in writing that you can keep living here as long as you want, as long as we treat each other with respect. You contribute what you can toward taxes and upkeep. Not because I need your money, but because clarity keeps resentment from growing. He considered that, like a lease, he asked. Like an agreement, I said, between family, something we both sign so no one can twist it later. He traced a groove in the wood with his fingertip, and in return he asked, What do you want from me besides that? I want you to stop telling people I'm the villain in your story, I said. I want you to tell my brother, the neighbors, the pastor the truth. That you were wrong. That I didn't steal your house. That Mom's parents made sure I'd always have a home. He looked up at me, and this time there was no anger in his eyes, just regret. I don't want to lose you, he said. Not for a house, not for my pride, not for anything. You almost did, I replied. That text? That could have been the last straw. I know, he whispered. But it isn't, I said. You showed up. You listened. You called the locksmith. That counts. If you keep doing that, showing up, telling the truth, we might figure this out. Outside, a truck rumbled by. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime tinkled. Ordinary sounds on an ordinary American afternoon, while inside this little house we took the first real steps toward something I'd almost stopped believing in. Not revenge, not victory. Repair. And for the first time since I read We No Longer Trust You, I felt that tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to let a little hope in. The next few weeks didn't unfold like a movie where one breakthrough fixes everything. Real life, especially family life, moves in slow, uneven inches. Some days felt hopeful, others felt like we were right back at zero. But that's the thing about repairing something that's been broken for a long time, you don't rush it. You respect the work. The first step happened 3 days after the locksmith changed the locks. My father really called me not with anger or accusations, but with a quiet, almost humbled tone. I talked to Pastor Reynolds, he said, clearing his throat. Told him the truth. Told him I handled things wrong. He wants to see you next Sunday if you're up for it. I leaned back on my couch, letting the words settle. That wasn't small. My father didn't like admitting wrongdoing, especially not to someone he held in high regard. It felt like the first stone placed in a new foundation. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. A few days later, he stopped by my rental house with a folder full of old photographs, ones I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of my mother in the garden of my grandparents on Christmas morning, of me in a tiny Marine costume at age 6, saluting with my hand on the wrong side of my forehead. I found these in a box in the shed, he said. I thought you should have them. I opened the folder and touched the edges of the photos. His hands trembled slightly as he held the others. We didn't talk about the house that day. We just sat at the kitchen table flipping through memories, letting the past breathe without trying to rewrite it. It was the closest we'd been in years. But healing isn't linear. The stepmother problem resurfaced next. One afternoon as I pulled into the driveway of the house, she met me on the porch with crossed arms and a storm brewing behind her eyes. I don't care what the paperwork says, she snapped. I've lived here 11 years. I'm not signing anything. I'm not agreeing to anything, and I'm not being treated like a guest in my own home. I took a slow breath. No one is treating you like a guest, but respect goes both ways. And so does honesty. This is manipulation, she hissed. Your grandparents didn't want me in this house, so they wrote you into it. That's all this is. Her voice rose sharp and loud, and I saw the curtain in the living room shift, my father watching. I kept my tone steady. They wrote me into it because they loved me, and because they wanted their daughter's family to stay connected, not divided. You don't deserve this, she said. I let the words hang there. Years ago I might have argued. Now I just looked at her and said, we don't have to like each other, but we can choose not to hurt each other. She blinked at that. I don't think she expected calm. She expected a fight. My father came onto the porch then, quieter than usual. Enough, he told her. We're going to do this the right way. She stared at him like she didn't recognize him. You're taking her side. He shook his head. I'm taking the truth's side. She didn't speak to him for the rest of the night. But something important happened. He didn't follow her inside. He stayed on the porch with me. A week after that, we finalized the agreement. The lawyer drafted a simple document. I was the legal owner, and my father was allowed to stay indefinitely as long as we maintained mutual respect and clear communication. He signed without hesitation. My stepmother refused to sign anything at first, but eventually, after 2 long evenings of tense negotiations, she relented. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was peace. The next major turning point came unexpectedly. One Saturday morning, Dad called and asked if I wanted to help him repaint the back deck. It was the kind of project we used to do when I was little. He'd hammer nails just enough to get them started, and I'd pound them in crooked while pretending I was helping. When I showed up, he already had the paint cans open. There were sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a cooler of sweet tea, and a playlist of old country songs Mom used to love. We worked side by side for hours, not talking about the past, not talking about the trust, just working. At one point he paused and rested his hand on the railing. Your mother would have liked this, he said quietly. Seeing us out here again? I think so too, I said. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry for everything. I know that word doesn't fix years of mistakes, but I want to try. I want to do better. I set down my paintbrush. Trying is enough. That's all I ever wanted. His eyes glistened, though he'd never admit it. You're stronger than me, he muttered. No, I said. I just learned how to bend without breaking. He nodded, letting the words land. Not long after that, my stepmother packed a suitcase. She said she needed space to think. Dad didn't try to stop her. For the first time since marrying her, he didn't choose her arguments over his daughter's well-being. She left and the house exhaled. Dad and I spent the next few days cleaning out the garage, going through the storage boxes, sorting old tools and Christmas decorations. We found Mom's teapot, the one that had disappeared years ago, wrapped in newspaper at the bottom of a bin. He handed it to me gently. This should have stayed in the kitchen. I didn't need an apology, that one sentence was enough. When we placed the teapot back on the stove, the house felt like it found a missing heartbeat. The reconciliation wasn't dramatic. It came in small, steady moments. Dinner on a Tuesday night, a long drive to the cemetery, a conversation where he admitted he'd been jealous of the life I built, and another where I admitted I'd resented him for never asking about it. Repair isn't flashy, but it's real, and it's worth it. One evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset bleed orange across the sky, he said, "I hope someday you live here again." "Maybe," I said, "but even if I don't, this will always be home." He nodded. "As long as you're in my life, I'm good." It was simple. It was enough. So here's the truth I've learned through all of this. Something I want anyone listening to carry with them. Sometimes the real battle isn't over houses or inheritance or pride. It's over whether we let old wounds make us strangers, or whether we choose to do the hard work of coming back together. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need its reminder. Family is messy. Forgiveness is brave. And healing is possible one honest conversation at a time. Thank you for being here. If you'd like more stories like this, true, human, and grounded, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe, follow, or come back for the next chapter.